Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our September Clear Up the Chaos. I can't believe here we are, end of quarter 3. It's wild how fast time goes. But I have Emily here with Ironwood joining us this morning, and she's going to be speaking on workplace burnout, addiction and ADA, and then risk and rewards when it comes to rehiring former employees. I know there's pros and cons to that. So, Emily, we appreciate you taking time to join us. I want to remind everyone, as a client of NCW and Sanford and Tatum, you do have access to Ironwood and their consultants at any point in time. An agreement is needed for that service, and as a client of ours, it is free. So, if you haven't taken an opportunity to sign up for that service, I highly encourage you. When I send the follow-up email regarding this presentation, I will include that should you wish to move forward with that. But thanks for taking time out of your schedules to join us, and I'm going to hand things over to Emily.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So normally if you guys join us, you probably know that Mitch is usually with me, but unfortunately he is off on site with a client today. So you're just going to hear me ramble on about 3 different topics today, but I'm happy to be here. Since I'll be throwing a lot of information at you, like Elizabeth said, please reach out. We can help navigate any of these. So to kick it off, I'm going to cover addiction and ADA first. This one's probably going to be the more regulated one than the other 2 topics. So definitely tune in. So the American Disabilities Act is a comprehensive piece of legislation that addresses various aspects of employment for individuals with disabilities, including those with addiction issues related to alcohol, illegal drugs, and the misuse of legal drugs. The ADA ensures that people with disabilities, including those with addiction problems, have the same rights and opportunities in the workplace as everyone else. This protection extends to individuals dealing with prescription drug use disorder and opioid use disorder. The ADA prohibits discrimination against a qualified person with a disability at all stages of employment. A qualified person with a disability is someone who possesses the necessary skills, experience, and education to perform essential functions of the job, either with or without a reasonable accommodation. These accommodations can include schedule changes or leave to attend support meetings or rehabilitation programs. The ADA applies to private employers with 15 or more employees and all state and local governments, with some state laws also covering smaller private employers. Again, Ironwood's happy to help you navigate that. A disability under the ADA is defined as having a physical or mental impairment that significantly limits one or more major life activities, having a history of such an impairment, or being regarded as having one. Major life activities include functions like walking, seeing, self-care, learning, working, thinking, communicating, as well as bodily functions such as neurological and brain functions. Addiction is typically considered a disability because it affects these functions mentioned before. The ADA treats addiction to alcohol and illegal drug use differently. Alcohol addiction is generally considered a disability, whether the individual is currently using alcohol or has a history for it. For individuals with opioid or other drug addiction, the ADA protects those in recovery who are no longer engaged in the current illegal use of drugs. At the application and interview stage, the ADA prohibits disability-related questions, medical inquiries, and exams, even if they pertain to the job. Pre-offer employment inquiries requiring alcohol addiction may involve explaining gaps in employment without disclosing the specific disability. For legal drug use, questions about past addiction are prohibited. After the job offer is out, but before starting work, employers may make medical inquiries, require exams, and ask disability-related questions, as long as they do so for the individuals within that job category. Employees must disclose their disabilities if asked. And again, that is before they start, but the job offer was signed. On the job, employers can make disability-related inquiries and require medical exams if they have objective reasons to believe a disability may affect job performance or public safety. Employees must disclose their disabilities if they need accommodation. In cases of addiction-related issues on the job, employers may offer a last chance agreement where the employer agrees to receive treatment in exchange for continued employment. Violating the agreement can result in termination. Again, that's going to be kind of one of those sticky situations that we're happy to help navigate. But in situations where individuals are legally using drugs as prescribed, they are protected under the ADA. However, if they misuse prescribed drugs, they may not be covered. Regarding medical marijuana, which is obviously the hot topic as states become more legalized, the ADA follows federal law, making it illegal unless your state says otherwise. And employers may need to consider reasonable accommodation under state disability discrimination law for off-site use, depending on your local regulations. But again, I know that Ironwood has definitely touched on medical marijuana and drug use and drug testing and things like that in the past, so happy to help navigate. But to switch gears a little bit, did you know that 46.3 million people aged 12 or older, which is about 16.5% of the population, met the applicable criteria for having a substance use disorder in the past year, including 29.5 million people who were classified as having an alcohol use disorder and 24 million people who were classified as having a drug use disorder. An estimated 10.8 million adults have substance use disorder and are employed full-time. And then I don't know if you've heard of SAMHSA, that's the site that I got those statistics off of, but very interesting information, and those numbers are quite scary when you're just kind of thinking about it. So you might be wondering, what are the signs or symptoms of addiction? There's going to be physical and psychological symptoms. So some are going to be mood swings, increased temper, tiredness, paranoia, agitation, defensiveness, poor judgment, loss of energy or motivation, neglecting appearance, spending excessive amounts on the money for the substance use, and the inability to focus or concentrate, obsessing about the next dose. Oftentimes I feel, at least in my experience, people with addiction aren't, some are super quiet about it, some are very vocal, so it just really depends on that sign. But some other signs include bloodshot eyes, pupils larger or smaller than normal, changes in appetite, sleep patterns, physical appearance, unusual smells. And addiction can also cause changes in the behavior. So that could be the inability to stop the substance abuse, continuing with the negative consequences. So, you know, they're experiencing these physical changes, they're not showing up to work, things like that may be happening, and they continue forward anyway. Being preoccupied with the substance use, so, you know, they're spending their time doing it, and then experiencing withdrawal symptoms. And employers can accommodate employees with substance use disorders in various ways. So I'm going to list some of those. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list, but it is something that could help you navigate this within your organization if you think that any of your employees are experiencing addiction. So first and foremost, you'll want to educate and train supervisors and staff. So if you provide proper training, and again, of recognizing the signs of substance use disorder and how to approach employees who may be struggling, company policies and procedures will be important, and making sure that you're implementing training processes for that. It is best practice for an HR professional to be part of the conversation if you are experiencing somebody with addiction. And that's best practice, because a lot of the times it's going to come up in conversation of resources needed, employee assistance program, might need to work through accommodating a different schedule, things like that. And usually that's best perceived if an HR professional is involved, hence why we're all here. But if you have your supervisory staff handling those conversations, training would be appropriate. You could also allow for flexible work schedules to accommodate attendance for counseling sessions, support groups, medical appointments, anything that's going to be related to the substance use treatment. Leave and time off. So it's definitely a good time to reevaluate your policies and procedures in those regards, or just freshen up on how to navigate leave and time off, or, you know, if the employees have PTO or anything like that, they could use. And, you know, obviously, you know, FMLA, ADA, all that, and just as going through the motions there and refreshing yourself. I mentioned employee assistance programs. This comes very important when it comes to mental health, and addiction plays into mental health as well. So that would be a resource that could be offered. Having a supportive work environment, and, you know, just having that non-judgmental work environment where the employees can feel comfortable seeking help. I'm sure we all can relate to the fact that asking for help is sometimes the hardest thing that we can do. So if you just kind of already have that supportive environment in place, that's going to go a long way. Reasonable accommodation, that goes without saying, and this may be including modified job duties or schedules that can create and undue hardships on the business. Return to work plans, again, that's going to be something that you'll want to kind of revisit to see what policies you have in place, but having a structured return to work plan that outlines expectations and support mechanisms for the employees returning will, again, go a long way to show them support. Reviewing substance use policies, that's going to be important. I'm sure most handbooks are going to have that drug and alcohol use and what to do, or what the employee will expect if, you know, if they're doing drugs or alcohol on the job, things like that. So reviewing those. Same with random drug testing policies and becoming familiar there. Having supportive communication. So again, that's going to tie into just kind of that supportive work environment as well. And it's very important, and I'm sure it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it, maintain confidentiality is going to be super important. And again, that's going to come into that supervisory training as well. I've been in scenarios where the supervisors or managers are talking amongst each other and it's information that doesn't need to be shared and it should just be with HR. And I'm just making sure your team is equipped to know when to talk and when not to. Having peer support, that's going to be another thing that can be done. You know, you could offer peer support programs. There's also things called employee resource groups, and this just focuses on addiction recovery and provides the employees with a sense of community and understanding. Wellness programs, reasonable adjustments such as, you know, job tasks, assignments, things like that, that can help that employee temporarily as they navigate their substance use. You could also do referrals for employee assistance resources, and then you can also monitor progress and compliance. Again, that's going to be super important to make sure that we're all following rules and regulations. So contact Ironwood. It is also important for employees to consult with legal counsel when developing and implementing accommodation for employees with substance use disorder to ensure compliance. Additionally, maintaining a culture for compassion, understanding, and support will go a long way. We get a lot of clients who reach out requesting guidance on how to handle conversations surrounding employee assistance programs, like within the workplace. And I think that's so relevant because I feel that a lot of times it's hard when the employee is asking for help, but navigating all the compliance needs around it and what you can say and what you can't say. And you don't want to ever like suggest that they need treatment. You don't want to try to diagnose them, things like that. So it's a very delicate kind of conversation. So I figured since we're on the topic of how to help employees with addiction, I figured I could do a brief summary of just ways and resources to kind of help navigate that employee assistance program conversation. So you'll want to choose an appropriate setting. So you'll want it to be private, you want it to be comfortable, and you want to ensure confidentiality and minimize distractions. Distractions are going to go a long way because you want to provide that undivided attention to show that support. So make sure it is in a quiet, private kind of place. Schedule a meeting. Sometimes that's a little bit easier than just kind of flagging someone down and pulling them to the side. You know, it could be a lengthy conversation. It could be a 5-minute conversation, just kind of really depends. But again, providing that time and not only respecting your own time and what you have going on, but respecting theirs as well by scheduling a meeting. You can also express concern and empathy. And, you know, just by having that conversation about their well-being and your desire to support them is going to go a long way. Explaining the EAP is going to be the most important. Obviously, that's the purpose of the conversation. But explaining all the range of services, you don't necessarily want to focus on just the service you think they'll benefit from. So hitting all the points will definitely be helpful. And just, again, emphasizing that it's a confidential resource designed to help address personal and work-related challenges will also be important. At least experience for myself with past employees. Once I mention that it is confidential, usually they're a little bit more open to contacting. It's always hard to talk to a stranger, but it's a little bit easier to talk about your problems if you don't know someone. Also share other information if there's any other materials or anything surrounding EAP that may help. Definitely point out where like the contact information is, if it's going to be a website, if it's going to be like a brochure they need, anything like that, make sure we're providing it. You'll want to also just kind of end the stigma surrounding seeking help and just let them know that it's okay. You know, everybody faces challenges, and just encourage the idea that asking for asking for assistance is a sign of strength, not weakness. Again, maintaining that confidentiality, offering your own support, and then you'll want to answer any kind of questions. And I think that the most important thing, at least in my experience of dealing with the AP conversations, is just a follow up. Again, not necessarily not like you can't force treatment, but I'm just following up with them, make sure they're okay, make sure they understand that the resources are still in place. They didn't have to call that day kind of thing. It's 24-hour service, whatever you need to say there. And just respect boundaries though. I think that we all can understand self-awareness and social cues. So just paying attention there. And then you'll want to document the conversation from a managerial standpoint, if it's appropriate, and just make sure that you're abiding by your company policies. And again, sensitive information, so make sure where you're placing it makes sense. And then avoid pressure. Don't be judgmental. And then again, offer those additional resources. And then remember that your role is to provide information, support, and encouragement. So again, we're not trying to diagnose or treat them or anything like that. When you're attempting to be an empathetic person, you typically try to relate to them with your own scenarios, things like that. But just be more cautious because it's about them, not necessarily you. But again, that is a way to show support if you can relate to the issue they have going on. But in conclusion, the ADA provides vital protections for individuals with disabilities, including those with addiction, as we've been discussing. Employers should be aware of their obligations under the law to ensure equal opportunities and fair treatment for all employees. Additionally, they should stay informed about state-specific laws as they can be ever-changing, especially in cases involving medical marijuana. And again, I know Ironwood has talked about this multiple times, but we're happy to help navigate that situation as well. Now, switching gears completely, my next topic is covering the risks and rewards when rehiring former employees. I have a restaurant background before I joined Ironwood, and that if you have any sort of relation to the restaurant industry, it's a revolving door sometimes, and we got a lot of employees that would quit and then they would come back, and it was just certain steps that you have to take and things like that. But it definitely has its benefits, but also has disadvantages, and I'm going to dive in on those. So just kind of in the current economic landscape, companies seeking to rebound are facing a challenge. Ever since COVID kind of hit, it's been difficult to stay fully staffed. I'm sure that we all can relate to that. The job market right now is very crazy. I also do recruiting for Ironwood. So the job market when it comes to just finding quality candidates has been a struggle. So a lot of companies are looking to rehire former employees. And that could just be simply, again, presenting advantages. They know quantity, reducing the uncertainty associated with new hires. I know a lot of times hiring managers are on the fence sometimes if this person's going to fit into the culture, if they're going to get it, things like that. But there's a shorter learning curve and familiarity with company culture, procedures, and existing networks that make them a valuable asset. They may have acquired new skills since leaving as well. However, again, it's going to present challenges, but I'm going to start off with some statistics. I'm a statistics kind of gal. It just registers a little bit better for me. Research by Global Force and SHRM found that 33% of HR professionals believe rehires have a positive impact on employee morale, and they signal that the organization values former employees. A study by Workplace Trends found that rehires typically have a shorter recruitment cycle, leading to quicker fill times for job openings. In a LinkedIn survey, 78% of HR professionals and hiring managers agreed that rehires are more likely to fit into the company culture compared to new hires. And then according to the Work Institute, it is estimated that replacing an employee can cost up to 33% of their annual salary. Rehiring former employees can significantly reduce these costs as they often require less training and onboarding. So when reintegrating rehires into the organization, consider how they fit into the new team dynamic and roles. And I lost my train of thought. Rehiring employees can offer the following advantages. So they'll be familiar with company culture. So they're going to already know your values, your work environment, and it's going to reduce the risk of cultural misalignment, which is obviously going to go a long way in your company being successful. Also, as mentioned, reduce onboarding time. Rehires typically require less time and resources for onboarding and training since they're already acquainted with the company's processes and procedures. I do think it's worth mentioning that when it comes to, I've just been in the scenario where it's easier to onboard because they already know and they've been through the policies and regulations and things. But I think it's worth mentioning that you'll still want to follow through with going through the policies as just a nice refresher, and make sure they are signing any job descriptions or, the company handbook, things like that. They also have a known skill set, so you're already aware of the skills and capabilities. And again, it's going to reduce that uncertainty of hiring them or not. And it's going to be important again to consider the role that you're bringing them either back on for, or if it is a different position, and if their skill sets are going to be a match. They also have existing networks. So rehired employees often maintain professional networks within the company. So it's going to facilitate that collaboration and knowledge sharing, because they're already going to have their coworkers they're working with again, or maybe, have that relationship with those supervisors, things like that. They're also going to have insider insight. So former employees may bring valuable insight from their experiences outside the organization, which can lead to fresh perspectives and innovation. Again, my restaurant background, a lot of times the employees that left either went to a different restaurant or they went to what everybody refers to as their big kid job. So it just really kind of depends. When they come back, they're going to come with valuable skills that can help foster that culture. It's also going to boost morale. I also hit on being cost effective. It's going to be a quick integration. It's going to kind of show loyalty. I know that when I was a hiring manager way back when, you would question if the employee is going to leave, but then they want to come back and you're kind of questioning their loyalty. Oftentimes this is considered a boomerang employee, because they just kind of shoot out and come back. But honestly, statistics show that it leads to increased commitment and dedication when they do come back, because they sought out something different and realized they had it best there. It also has an advantage in the sense of filling talent gaps, because obviously you'll be able to fill your needs a little bit quicker if these employees are trying to come back. As I mentioned, the job market is just a little crazy right now. So filling those talent gaps is going to be the obviously company's important goal. Also, team dynamics will be enhanced. Again, it's going to be that seamless integration because the team already exists. It's going to provide a positive message that you are there to support and you valued their work, so you're bringing them back on, and that promotes that sense of security. And then again, for the last thing I'm going to hit is just that knowledge transfer. Any knowledge gained from their experiences outside is going to be super important. But with that said, there are also disadvantages for the organization. There could be like resentment and grudges. So former employees may harbor resentment or grudges related to their previous tenure, potentially leading to conflicts or negative workplace atmosphere. Not to mention there could be unresolved issues. So factors that led to the former employee leaving may still exist, such as dissatisfaction with the role or working conditions. Any of that could resurface. They could also just have maybe issues with other coworkers, and that may resurface as well if there's any sort of drama going on or anything like that. There could be lack of fresh perspective. While I was hitting on that knowledge transfer being so positive, there could be that lack of perspective, and the ideas that they had during their previous stint could also play a role into them coming back on and just getting back into that mindset rather than continuing forward by being innovative and have fresh thinking. There's also a disadvantage in the sense of that there could be stigma associated with rehires, with colleagues questioning their loyalty, their commitment, potential relationships, and morale. There could also be the disruption of team dynamics, competing with internal candidates. Rehiring without considering internal candidates for the role may lead to the resentment that we're speaking of among existing employees. So that's why it's very important that if you are looking for a specific position, it is known within your organization that you're hiring for it, so your current employees can apply. There is another disadvantage would be limited diversity and experience, as you're not bringing on new team members, and you're continuously rehiring former employees. That may limit the exposure to diverse experiences and backgrounds. which is obviously going to be valuable to have those DE&I initiatives within your organization. Another disadvantage could just be that uncertain long-term commitment, again, kind of hitting on that tenure of if they're going to leave, back to their loyalty. Difficult for evaluations. It can be challenging to assess whether a former employee has truly changed and resolved any issues that led to their departure, especially if you're just going to re-interview them. A lot of times in my experience, most of the time you don't necessarily interview them because you already know. So it's just going to be important to have those conversations before you extend the job offer. It could also be may limit the organization's ability to bring fresh perspectives, ideas, loss of learning opportunities. There could also be success expectations. They might be higher just because, again, trying to prove that loyalty, you might inadvertently place expectations that wouldn't necessarily have been there before. There could also be some reputation risk, just because, you know, the former employee departed at one point and now could be for negative circumstances. Again, that could all re-arise, and just put your reputation on the line. I think that we all can understand that our brand is very important. And at one point, our former employee represented our brand and then they didn't, and now they're back. And that could also limit their networking diversity. So it's important for organizations to carefully consider these disadvantages and assess the individual circumstances and suitability of rehire before making a decision. So again, having those effective conversations about kind of where they see, what's their 5-year plan, goals, things like that. But ultimately, decision to rehire should align with the organization's strategic goals and values. It is essential for HR professionals and hiring managers to conduct thorough assessments, engage in open communication, things like that. And it's definitely important to make sure that your management or supervisory staff is trained on proper procedures when rehiring former employees. Oftentimes, again, it's going to be best practice to make sure that they are elevating and involving HR. So, you know, a lot of times hiring managers may not realize that that former employee is not actually rehirable. So they'll want to have the conversation with HR before extending job offers, and just making sure they're following proper procedures, making sure that when they are onboarding, they bring their documentation, their license, social security card, whatever documents they bring for their I-9, making sure all of that's still compliant and following the proper steps. Because a lot of the times, if you are in a hiring need, typically sometimes companies fall in line with hiring for need rather than wanting that person, if that makes sense. And it's always been my best practice to hire for a want versus a need, because you want that person because they're going to add value to your organization, not just because you need to fill the role. So just kind of thinking along those lines and making sure that you're following the proper steps and not just trying to fill the gap. And lastly, that kind of wraps up that topic. My last one I'm hitting on is workplace burnout. I have, again, I keep referencing my restaurant background, but again, if you have any sort of experience in the restaurant, I think we all can relate to the fact that the turnover rate is super high and workplace burnout is very, very relevant in the restaurant industry. So this one kind of hits home for me. But workplace burnout is a pervasive issue impacting both individuals and organizations. It arises from chronic workplace stress that is poorly managed and exhibits 3 key dimensions. So you have emotional exhaustion, mental distance from work, and reduced efficacy. The consequences of burnout are substantial, leading to negative effects on absenteeism, job satisfaction, and overall well-being. Employees experiencing burnout face increased risks of physical and mental health disorders, including depression, heart disease, diabetes. And here I am going to go into more statistics. So burnout has been linked to 84% increased risk of type 2 diabetes and 40% increased risk of hypertension. Burnout can impair cognitive processes essential for daily work activities. This includes short-term memory, attention, decision-making, problem-solving skills. Employees experiencing burnout have a 57% increased risk of workplace absence greater than 2 weeks due to illness. According to a Gallup study, nearly 8 in 10 workers experience burnout on the job at least sometimes. More than 1 in 4 workers report experiencing burnout very often or always. Certain professions, such as healthcare, social work, and education, are more prone to burnout due to the nature of their work and high levels of stress and emotional demands. And some studies suggest that women may be more susceptible to burnout than men, although the factors contributing to burnout can vary by gender. So, some signs and symptoms of burnout, again, are going to be mental, emotional, and physical, but some of those to look out for is going to be that feeling of exhaustion and depletion of energy, feeling cynical or critical at work, having trouble concentrating, feeling irritable, impatient with coworkers, customers, clients, having a hard time getting started at work, feeling helpless, defeated, trapped, feeling detached or alone in the world, having a negative outlook, missing deadlines, procrastinating, thinking about quitting more often, and having chronic anxiety. And a lot of these are going to tie in for, again, it's emotional, physical, and they're definitely signs that, as for an employer looking out for their employees, if they're burnt out or not, it's going to be absenteeism, presenteeism, and I'll hit on a few of those. But addressing workplace burnout requires a multifaceted approach involving both employers and employees. Employers can periodically measure burnout levels, monitor workloads, and foster supportive, inclusive workplaces. So some strategies include employee surveys. So if you conduct regular surveys that specifically address burnout and well-being, they can include questions related to stress levels, workload, work-life balance, overall job satisfaction, and just use validated scientific tools and standardized questionnaires to quantify burnout levels. And by that, I am inserting, again, another plug to reach out to Ironwood for help. But conducting these surveys will definitely help navigate, especially if it's going to be an anonymous report. And this can just, creating that confidentiality allows the employee to express their concerns about burnout, workload, workplace issues more freely, and provide that honest, open feedback that we're all looking for that we wouldn't necessarily get if you have to put your employee's name on that paper. Providing regular check-ins. So if you schedule one-on-one check-in meetings with employees to discuss their workload, stress levels, well-being, and just overall encouragement, that's going to, kind of like I've been hitting on, just provide that overall culture and supportive work environment. You could also occasionally or continuously assess workload, and just kind of ensure that you are paying attention to those employees who consistently work long hours and take on excessive responsibilities. You can also pay attention to your performance metrics, monitoring these metrics and deadlines to identify patterns of overwork or high stress. High levels of absenteeism, presenteeism, or missed deadlines can be indicators of burnout. And if you didn't know, presenteeism is where an employee prioritizes showing up over taking care of themselves. So they are physically present at work, but they're unable to be productive or perform well, which obviously can lead to more mistakes on the job. Some other things that we can kind of negate the workplace burnout would just be providing work-life balance initiatives. Especially being HR professional, I think we all can relate that work-life balance can be pretty difficult at times. But if you implement policies and programs that promote this balance, flexible working hours, remote work options, generous vacation policies, understanding a lot of these may not be feasible for your organization. So you can conduct workshops, incentive programs, or like employee outings, anything that's going to kind of provide them relief of work. Mental health support. So again, employee assistance programs, offering resources for counseling, and just ensure that the employee is aware that these resources are an option, will go a long way. You can also kind of like with the rehiring of former employees, that training and awareness is going to be very key to combating workplace burnout. So conducting training sessions and workshops to raise awareness about burnout, stress management, importance of self-care, just making sure that both the employees and managers are educated on these topics will definitely go a long way and help out in that sense. Especially if you're including the employees in these training, and if it's like a workshop or anything like that, it'll make them more open-minded to paying attention to their physical and emotional needs and hopefully communicate that. Providing inclusive leadership. practices that value diversity, equity, and inclusion, creates an environment where employees feel respected, supported, regardless of their background and identity. Feedback mechanisms, that's another thing that you can implement. And I call it a feedback loop. So basically the employee can provide input on workplace policies, practices, and culture, and then provides the management team to act on this, and it's a loop. You can also provide recognition and rewards. So for their contributions, their achievements, just make them feel appreciated and valued overall will reduce the risk of burnout. Workplace flexibility, conflict resolution, that's going to be very important from a managerial standpoint, is to provide conflict resolution in a timely manner, encouraging that respectful communication, but following through as well is going to go a long way. And I think from like a business standpoint, a big thing that will help workplace burnout is having a clear career development path. Again, referencing the restaurant, sometimes it would be hard to have paths lined out, because sometimes working in the restaurant is not somebody's career, it's more of a stepping stone until the next big thing. So if you have opportunities to offer for skill development or career advancement, and lining that path out for them will definitely help, as it's creating goals and it's going to be more engaging and motivating for that employee to show up and do a good job, especially if it's going to be a money kind of pull for them, knowing that they can get to that next step. And then providing just regular assessments, that's going to be very important as well. And by implementing these strategies, employers can create a work environment that actively addresses burnout, monitors those workloads, fosters inclusivity and support for those employees. Now, it's going to be a two-way street, though. Just because the employer can offer these things, the employee can also work on things, such as setting boundaries. So having those clear boundaries set between work and personal life, and they avoid taking work-related calls or responding to emails in non-working hours, that will go a long way for them. They can also prioritize self-care. They could take regular breaks, actually use their vacation days, if they have them, obviously. Set realistic goals for themselves so they can manage their workload by that day, prioritizing their tasks, setting their goals, avoid overcommitting and taking on too much at once. I'm a big to-do list person, and I put everything on my to-do list, and I feel like I failed at the end of the day when I have 18 things I didn't get to. So making sure that the goals that they're setting for the day are realistic is important. Communicating with supervisors, seeking that support. A big thing they can do also is practice their time management. That's going to fall in line with setting those priorities and those realistic goals. But any sort of techniques to help. You can even do workshops on practicing time management, things like that. They could also learn some stress management techniques. I mean, this could be something such as deep breathing, practicing mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, and just ways to cope with stress when they feel if they're having high anxiety in that moment. Taking mental health breaks. If the employee is ever feeling overwhelmed, and just making that more known within your organization that is okay, that you can take 5 minutes to collect yourself and get back to work. Another thing that employees can do is just engage in their own skill development, ask those questions if there's any opportunities, recognizing where they want to go in the organization, and then just practice that assertiveness. Reflect on their own values and goals. They can seek the professional help, engage in social support. And then, again, those mindfulness practices, things like that. As I mentioned, one of the hardest things that we can do as humans is ask for help sometimes, but knowing when to escalate issues is going to go a long way. If that employee speaks up, there's no reason that they should be so frustrated or upset with their job if there's solutions to fix it. And then, lastly, I just kind of want to hit on that it's important to make sure HR is involved. So again, training your supervisors, your managers, making sure that they're involving HR where it's appropriate when an employee is facing workplace burnout, is going to be super important. So that way we can be directing the conversations appropriately. And then with all this information, as I usually say at the end, I threw a lot at you, but other than that, I just really appreciate your time today. Hopefully Mitch can join us next time and go over some fun topics. But again, Ironwood's always happy to help. I'm going to pass it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Emily. Always great information. You come prepared to share. We appreciate that. A friendly reminder, Clear Up the Chaos does take place the second Tuesday of every month. So if you don't have that as a standing appointment on your calendar, I highly encourage you to do that. Our next Clear Up the Chaos will be taking place Tuesday, October 10th. So I hope you'll be able to join us. A friendly reminder, I will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording should you wish to share this with anyone within your organization, as well as an Ironwood agreement if you haven't taken time yet to get that in place. I highly encourage you to do that. I always say it's better to have that agreement in place ahead of time prior to a crisis. It makes things run much smoother. So wishing each of you a great week, and I will see y'all back here in October. Thanks again, guys. Bye.